At you fast, you look up and your youth has passed. The trade-off is you gained a little wisdom. We were raised in different spaces, different classes, different races. It's our faith that makes us sisters in the kingdom. Wives or lovers, friends or mothers, daughters or sisters, that's ground we've covered. Bosses or workers, owners or renters, we've picked life splinters out of all of our fingers. Now we're here for a cause, to talk about this change of us, to offer up support and applause for all the women who are girls gone menopause. Oh! For all the women who are girls gone menopause. For all the women.
My name is Nathan Hochman. I'm the District Attorney of Los Angeles County. Today I'm here to announce that our office will be filing charges against Nick Reiner, who is accused of killing his parents, actor-director Rob Reiner, and photographer-producer Michelle Singer Reiner. These charges will be 2 counts of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of multiple murders. He also faces a special allegation that he personally used a dangerous and deadly weapon, that being a knife. These charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty.
Hey, you're listening to another episode of Girls Gone Menopause. This is Adreana.
And I'm Alison.
Usually we're here to laugh about hot flashes or complain about brain fog. But today we are pivoting to something much heavier.
We are. If you've been listening, you know our premiere episode was about people lost in 2025 and 2024 who meant something to us or to society.
Well, we recorded that episode in late October. So an omission I'm sure our listeners noticed was the death of Rob Reiner.
And if you've been paying attention to the news, you also know that Rob's son, Nick Reiner, has been charged with the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife. Stuff having to do with his arraignment has been all over the news. The entire story is a complete tragedy. Nick Reiner had been in and out of rehab since age 15.
Nick had also at some points been homeless. This was supposedly because Rob Reiner and his wife had to kick Nick out of their house because he was refusing the treatment options they had offered and were willing to pay for.
But, you know, I wonder about that. I know people who have kicked their kids out of the house because they were not getting along for whatever reason. And guess what? Those kids were not on the street. They were at their grandma's house. They were at their auntie's house. They were at a friend's house. On occasion, they were even at my house. So the fact that Nick, as a teen, had nowhere to go but the streets says to me that his behavior had burned every possible relationship to people of whom he might ask for a place to stay.
I feel the same way, Alison. And when I think about it, I don't find it too surprising because part of what came out last year in all the press coverage was that Nick Reiner had, not too long before the murders he allegedly committed, been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yeah, I'm not precisely sure what's up right now because I have not been following every development in Nick Reiner's court appearances, but I remember last year when the press was reporting that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, that reports were saying that he was actually going to plead not guilty by way of insanity.
Nick's being mentally ill makes this no less of a tragedy. In fact, more so. And that leads to what we're going to be talking about on the show today. So here, Rob Reiner and his wife were spending all this money on rehab centers for their son since he was 15. When in fact, what could have been going on is that he wasn't actually a drug addict as much as he was a mentally ill person who abused street drugs. It could very well be that Rob and his wife saw Nick's behavior, found drug paraphernalia among his tinatomones things, and not illogically said, oh, our son is a drug addict. Let's get him help to break his addiction.
Yep. And all that time, what was really going on was that Nick, as a teen, started to manifest his schizophrenia. And the parents, mistaking it for drug addiction, kept trying to get him treatment for the wrong thing.
Until they couldn't, because he was 18 and could no longer be compelled into treatment.
And this is the horrible challenge parents have to face when they have a troubled teen. How to get that teen the appropriate help before the child turns 18 and the parent no longer has authority over the teen. This is probably the most serious conversation we've had on this show. We want to talk about the ticking clock. Specifically, what happens when you are the parent of a troubled teen, whether that's mental illness, addiction, or severe behavioral issues, and you are racing against time to get them help before they turn 18.
Because once they turn 18, the legal landscape changes completely. They are adults. They can walk out of treatment. They can refuse medication. And as a parent, your hands are legally tied.
Exactly. And this isn't just theoretical for us. We've seen it in our communities. You know, back in 2015, I remember being deeply affected by the shooting of Charley Leundeu Keunang here in Los Angeles. He was a Cameroonian national, 43 years old, schizophrenic, and he was shot by the LAPD. There was body camera footage of the shooting.
I remember that. It was heartbreaking.
And I remember crying when I saw the video on the news. A Black man, an immigrant, he was way different from me. But it didn't matter. I looked at him and saw my own son, with whom I had had struggles. I could easily visualize the situation with my own son going a completely different way and him ending up shot by police in some awful altercation. I actually went to a protest. I'd never done that before. But it really hit me. This man was someone's son. His mental illness had gone untreated to the point where he was homeless and in a confrontation with police. It's a parent's worst nightmare.
Those protests really made a difference, actually, as did all the news coverage. The LAPD investigation found that the officers did not use excessive force.
Surprise, surprise.
Keunang's family sued in civil court and reached a settlement where the city of Los Angeles paid them $1.95 million. And LAPD changed the way it trained officers to deal with mentally ill people. So, baby steps.
I don't know what kind of resources the family of Keunang did or didn't have when he was under the age of 18. I don't know if his illness even manifested before he became an adult. What I do know is that Rob Reiner and his wife tried their best to help Nick. And with all the money they had, with Rob Reiner being a big-time Hollywood director, they still couldn't keep their son's story from being a tragic one. And it is way harder for parents who don't have money.
And we'll talk more about that after the break.
Yes, stay with us.
Is your child's behavior putting a strain on your marriage? Well, you aren't alone. More than 80% of special needs parents, their marriage ends in divorce. This is It's Going to Be Okay with Dr. Roseanne, and I'm Dr. Roseanne. And we're talking about how your child's behavior can affect your marriage, can affect a lot of relationships. But if you're married or you have a partner in some way, shape, or form, parenting a kid with behavioral or mental health issues is hard. And it puts an additional strain on maybe a relationship that was not so solid, or sometimes it can be the demise of what we thought was a solid relationship.
This is the Girls Gone Menopause podcast. We're back from the break, and I'm Alison.
And I'm Adreana.
Thank you for sticking with us. We're back talking about how challenging it is for parents to get their underage kids the mental health help they need before the kids are 18 and able to refuse the help. The clip you just heard was Dr. Roseanne Kopana Hodge. She's a board-certified school psychologist and an integrative children's mental health expert. And what she is saying gets right to the heart of what the very first challenge is that parents may face.
In one way, and Alison, you know this from your own story, Rob Reiner and his wife were ahead of the game. Yes, because they had money, but in another way, that is even more fundamental. They were unified. They both agreed that their son actually needed the help.
That's so true. The first battle a parent may fight is not with their recalcitrant child, but with their own spouse or family. I was already divorced when I was deep into trying to help my son, and I was not supported in my efforts by my son's father. He refused to believe there was anything wrong with his son, like it was a reflection on him rather than mental illness being a disorder anyone could get.
In 2023, the charity Rethink Mental Illness conducted a survey of 1,300 people living with conditions like bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and other kinds of mental illness. The survey results revealed that stigma is still a huge obstacle to adult sufferers of mental illness seeking help. 3 out of 5 survey respondents admitted that anxiety about what others might think stopped them from seeking treatment.
Now, this Rethink Mental Illness survey was of actual adults suffering mental illness. But I'd be willing to bet the same stigma affects the parents of kids who have mental illness, as well as the kids themselves. Teens are very self-conscious about being considered different. And this is what was going on with my ex. The stigma and his perceived shame surrounding it kept him from being willing to admit that my son was different and needed help. I thank God for my parents, especially my mother. She was incredibly supportive. I wish I could say the same for many of my friends when I finally made the very difficult decision to send my son to a residential treatment institution. Oh, the nasty things some of these women said to me were just devastating. What kind of mother would send their child away? Stuff like that. God is so good, Adreana. God is so good. I prayed over that decision, and God showed me what was what, and it was only through my faith in God that I stayed the course. My son now is thriving, and he even says to me, "Mom, you saved my life."
Yes, the goddess is good, Alison. You sent your son to a facility that did actually help him. Parents trying just as hard to help their children as you sometimes end up sending them to facilities that do more harm than help.
Yes, and we'll be talking about that right after the break.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss how to improve care for the nearly 400,000 children that are living in the foster care system as we speak. While my experience was not through the foster care system, I know from personal experience the harm that is caused by being placed in youth residential treatment facilities. When I was 16 years old, I was ripped from my bed in the middle of the night and transported across state lines to the first of 4 youth residential treatment facilities. These programs promised healing, growth, and support, but instead did not allow me to speak, move freely, or even look out a window for 2 years. I was force-fed medications and sexually abused by the staff. I was violently restrained and dragged down hallways, stripped naked, and thrown into solitary confinement. My parents were completely deceived, lied to, and manipulated by this for-profit industry about the inhumane treatment I was experiencing.
This is Adreana, and this is the Girls Gone Menopause podcast, and we're back from the break. In this episode, we're talking about the challenges parents face getting care for their mentally ill children. The snippet you just heard was Paris Hilton in 2024 testifying before the House Ways and Means Committee.
This is Alison, and again, thank you for rejoining us. You know, I did a lot of research on the facility to which I sent my son. It wasn't even in the United States. But after Paris Hilton went on her crusade to educate the public about how more regulation was needed for residential treatment facilities, that is when I realized how blessed I and my son really had been. Because what you said before the break was right. Facilities that present themselves as just as legit as the one to which I sent my son are engaging in practices that can only be called abusive.
Yeah, Paris Hilton had that YouTube Originals documentary in 2020 called This is Paris, where she told the story of having been abused in one of these facilities that her parents sent her to, not because she was legit mentally ill, but because she was rebellious. With her being a celebrity and telling her story, it gave permission to a lot of now adult people who had been placed in an abusive facility to break their silence. That actually kicked Paris into activism mode. That's how she ended up testifying before state houses and before Congress.
I remember in 2024 watching that testimony from which we played the clip. Paris recounted being in this place in Utah called Provo Canyon School. It was not the only residential treatment facility her parents sent her to, but it was the worst. She claimed before Congress that at this Provo place, she was strangled, slapped in the face, spied on in the shower, and subjected to cervical exams that amounted to sexual assault because they were not medically necessary. Sounds absolutely horrific.
A direct result of Paris's advocacy and the movement it caused was the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. Again, it is only baby steps. The law establishes a federal work group on youth residential programs to improve data collection on safety and treatment quality. It essentially creates the first federal oversight mechanisms for an industry that previously operated with near total impunity. It's better than nothing. The increased transparency should at least help some when parents are investigating where to send their children for treatment. The state of Utah passed a law that requires residential treatment centers to document any time they use restraints or seclusion and bans chemical sedatives and peer restraints. It also mandates more frequent government inspections. California also passed a law that requires facilities to publicly report the use of restraints and seclusion rooms. Plus, it aims to stop the shuffling of abusive staff between facilities. So these state laws do a little bit more than the federal laws, and that's great if the family whose kid needs help lives in Utah or California.
Paris said during her testimony before the House that kids in foster care were often funneled into these unregulated residential treatment facilities, where she said they suffered institutional abuse under the guise of treatment. But it's not just vulnerable kids being put in these places. Paris comes from one of the wealthiest families in the country. Paris said parents are basically defrauded. She said facilities spend millions on marketing using educational consultants who receive kickbacks for referrals. They promise to fix behavioral issues like rebellion, drug use, depression with therapy and education. But she said that frequently the specialists and the protocols that the facilities claim will help the child are non-existent.
And of course, the parents are doing this because they feel it is the only thing they can do. Parents often turn to these facilities because local resources are just not there. When a child is in a mental health crisis, school systems and local hospitals often lack long-term solutions, leading desperate parents to believe a therapeutic boarding school is the only way to save their child's life. Didn't Hilton emphasize that her own parents were lied to and manipulated by glossy brochures and false promises of elite care?
She did indeed. What makes this doubly sad is that non-rich parents in some states are giving their kids up to foster care because they are so desperate to get their kids treatment. And the kids are winding up in these unregulated facilities anyway.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we're going to get into that after the break.
basically giving up your kid is...
Wow.
I can't think about that.
Right. I mean, to think of a parent being faced with the decision of, how do I keep my younger kids safe? How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep the child, the teenager that I love safe? And feeling like they're failing at that. What a feeling that must be, right? That they feel like they have no choice.
But that's the choice parents are faced with. There's an increase of parents filing for relief of custody. When a parent decides they're unable to take care of their child, they ask the court to relieve them of custody. Typically, the child would then go into foster care. Renee Brown is the CEO and president of DePaul Community Resources. She's part of a group the state put together to try and solve the issue.
They're usually in crisis mode. They have usually tried a lot of different things. They feel like they have no choice. Usually there's a safety issue. They are either afraid of their child, afraid of the choices their child is making.
It's happening in families with limited resources to upper middle class families who have a lot of resources and insurance.
This is Adriana, and we're back from the break with the Girls Gone Menopause podcast.
And I'm Alison. The snippet you just heard was a news segment from Virginia's WSLS local news. But the phenomenon being described is not just going on in Virginia. It's a cruel money trap for middle-class parents. These parents will often deplete their savings getting treatment for their child. They make too much money to qualify for Medicare, and whatever insurance they have won't cover all the treatment the kid needs. The treatment can cost $10,000 to $20,000 a month. A month.
Lord have mercy, a month.
So after the parents have broken the bank and their kid still needs more help, what do they have to do? They have to stand before a judge in a family court and humiliate themselves by officially pleading that they are unable to control their child or unable to provide for them. When they plead this, they are basically pleading to give up their parental rights and turn their child over to the state. Because the state is the only entity, often through Medicaid waivers or through the state juvenile justice system, that has funds set aside specifically for foster care kids with the resources to address their kids' issues. Once the kids are in foster care, the parents, who by law have given up parental rights, can no longer make medical decisions for their child and may not even be allowed unsupervised visitation with their child.
All this because we don't have Medicare for all. And
it gets worse. These parents who are actively trying to help their children but are in a desperate situation are often put on child abuse registries. If they are nurses or teachers, this could affect their ability to be employed. It's just a totally messed up situation for people that are just trying to help their kids.
California tried a different path, but the outcomes are just as unsatisfactory. It started 20 years ago with Laura's Law. It was passed in California in 2002 to stop the revolving door of people being hospitalized, being jailed, and being homeless, all because they were severely mentally ill.
Who was Laura anyway?
Laura Wilcox was a very young woman, just 19 years old, when she was gunned down by a schizophrenic man who had refused treatment. She was one of 3 employees murdered by the crazy man while they were working at a Nevada County mental health clinic. Laura's parents took their grief and turned it into activism. Laura was murdered in 2001 and the law passed in 2002, but that timeline does not tell the whole story. Laura Wilcox was pretty and young and white. The case got a lot of media attention. She was a victim of murder by a crazy person. But parents of crazy people had been advocating for years and years for a policy change that would help them compel their adult mentally ill children into treatment.
So did it work?
No, not really. And the attention brought to Laura Wilcox's death is part of the reason it didn't work as well as parents of mentally ill people would have liked. Legislation is a slew process. There are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of contingencies to consider. When legislation is rushed due to an incident that gets a lot of news coverage, the outcomes are often not what the politicians that passed the legislation promised voters. They just want to get a bill out of the door in order to say that they did something. In the case of Laura's Law in 2002, the California state legislature provided zero funding for the law, and because they provided zero funding, the state law made it voluntary for individual counties to actually implement the law.
And let me guess, with zero funding from state dollars, most counties decided to not implement the law.
You got it? The idea was to allow judges to order individuals with a history of violence or repeated hospitalizations to receive intense outpatient treatment before they deteriorated to the point of becoming an immediate danger to themselves or others. Well, intense outpatient treatment ain't cheap. So for 2 decades, the majority of California counties chose not to implement the law.
I have to imagine counties were also concerned about being sued by civil liberties groups who didn't like that county judges were mandating treatment for people who had, as adults, refused treatment.
Yep, that was another reason most counties did not implement the law.
And you know what? As much as my family struggled with my son, I can still totally understand the side of people who say, hey, wait a minute. You can't institutionalize adults who do not consent to being institutionalized. We already talked about that in the situation with parents turning their kids over to residential treatment facilities that end up being abusive. But there's another side to the story with adults, where adults are voluntarily entering treatment facilities because they recognize that they may be in mental health crisis, but even after they recognize that they are better, they're not allowed to leave.
Because the treatment facility wants to keep them for the maximum number of days for which their insurance will pay?
Yep, I read about this in a September New York Times deep dive investigation. It was called How a Leading Chain of Psychiatric Hospitals Traps Patients. It was about Acadia psychiatric hospitals. People, grown people, were coming in of their own volition, which by law should mean they could leave any time. Instead, Acadia was having staff declare them a danger to themselves or others and placing them on involuntary hold, which would just happen to end the day after the last day their insurance would cover the cost of the patient's stay. So if the patient's insurance would pay for a 30-day stay and the patient wanted to leave after 7 days, the shrinks at Acadia would say, oh no, you're clinically not well. We're going to put you on involuntary hold. Then, on day 30, the shrink would say, well, you've improved enough, so we're discharging you tomorrow.
Well, things kinda went in the opposite direction with Laura's Law. Like I said, most California counties decided to not even implement it because of expense. Even in counties that did adopt it, the criteria were incredibly narrow. A person had to have a demonstrable history of lack of compliance with treatment and a history of violent behavior or multiple recent hospitalizations. This meant families often had to wait for a tragedy or a complete breakdown before they could utilize the law. The law was a dismal failure as far as scale. California has around 40 million residents. Of those 40 million, about 170,000 are homeless, many of whom are mentally ill. Nevada County in California was the first to implement the law and served as the model. Between the years of 2008 and 2015, a 7-year period, the county had only about 100 referrals total. Of those, only 37 resulted in a formal court order. In all of California, only 218 people were served by Laura's Law in the fiscal year of 2018 to 2019.
That's below a drop in the bucket. That's like nothing.
That's pretty much what the governor of California, named Gavin Newsom, said when he signed a follow-up bill into law.
And so this is a completely different approach. So please, I want to get out. This is not just cops going out there arresting folks and then throwing away the key and saying, you have no rights, and we're substituting every damn decision-making. This is a completely new strategy.
California instituted the Care Court in response to the failures of Laura's Law. Counties were not allowed to opt out of instituting Care Court. It was marketed as a way to hold counties accountable. If a judge orders a care plan, the county was obligated to provide the housing and services mandated by that plan at the risk of facing fines from the state. It was also meant as an intervention before people, especially those with schizophrenia or psychotic disorder, went all the way south and ended up in the criminal justice system.
So what happened? Did it work any better than Laura's Law?
Unfortunately, not really. A significant number of petitions filed by families are being dismissed by judges, often because the strict clinical criteria limiting it strictly to the schizophrenia spectrum excludes many people suffering from severe bipolar disorder or drug-induced psychosis. The narrowness of the policy was meant to abate the fears of civil liberties groups. But that narrowness ended up making the program less effective in terms of the number of people helped. And the constant problem of money did not go away. A judge can order a care plan, but if there are not enough psych ward beds, there are not enough psych ward beds. Enforcement for noncompliance is not exactly robust on the part of the state. So many families that were hoping this policy would help them with their adult children who have mental illness were left just as disappointed as when Laura's Law went into effect.
So at the same time that parents, rich or poor, have very limited resources to help their children suffering from mental illness, governments have upped the ante of consequences for parents for not controlling their mentally ill children,
including jail. And we'll talk about that after the break.
Mr. Rodger, Elliot was your son, and he is dead. How do you mourn a child whom others vilify?
It's very hard, Barbara. It's very, very hard. After reading the journal, I had a lot of anger for him. And I think my job now is to try and replace that anger with love and forgiveness. But at the same time, I'm haunted by this disease, this human being that changed and became something else.
The father of Adam Lanza now says that there are times he wishes his son had never been born. Do you ever feel that way?
That's a really loaded question.
This is Adriana, and we're back from the break with Girls Gone Menopause. In this episode, we're talking about the challenges parents face in getting mental health help for their teens and the consequences that might befall them if they don't.
That's right, and I'm Alison. The audio you heard after the break was the father of Elliot Rodger. Elliot Rodger murdered UC Santa Barbara students in a shooting rampage that he planned for months after being humiliated in an altercation at a college party. Now Elliot's mother, Chin, has to live the never-ending nightmare of having to live with knowing her mentally ill child killed other people's daughters and sons. Chin's story is devastating. By all accounts, she was a mother who was trying. She knew her son was troubled. She tried to intervene. She had him in therapy. She alerted authorities when she was scared. She was actively trying to stop a train wreck that she could see coming.
And yet she has to live with the fact that it happened anyway. Even with her intervention, the system and her son's illness overpowered her efforts. She is a victim in this tragedy too, living with that unimaginable guilt despite doing her. The thing is, Chin and her ex-husband did everything they could to help Elliot, whose issues started manifesting when he was 7 years old. Chin eventually channeled her grief into being an advocate and a spokeswoman for early threat detection programs.
Then there is the equally tragic but quite different circumstances of Ethan Crumbley and his parents. Ethan Crumbley murdered 4 students at his high school in 2021. In 2024, both his mother and his father were sentenced to 10 years in prison for failing to stop Ethan Crumbley from committing a mass shooting. The Michigan State Court judge said Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley ignored their son's obviously deteriorating mental health and failed to secure the handgun they had in their home. This was the first conviction of its kind, but I can assure our listeners that district attorneys all over the country were watching this trial and taking notes. Parents now have to worry that if the absolute worst case scenario happens and their mentally ill child becomes violent, they too will be up on charges.
Nobody wants to catch a case for something their child did, to be sure. But even if I already said this during this podcast, it is worth repeating. The majority of mentally ill people are more likely to be victims of violent crimes rather than perpetrators. That is just straight facts from crime statistics. On this podcast, we don't want to add to the stigma mentally ill people already face by promoting false stereotypes.
No, we certainly don't. Those are stereotypes that add to the stigmatization people feel that keeps them from seeking treatment for their children or for themselves. And to perpetuate them is the last thing we want. So yeah, Adreana, it is worth repeating. But beyond stigma, as we have been talking about during this entire episode, it is just hard for parents to access appropriate mental health help for their kids.
And we'll talk more about those challenges after the break.
Today is the first day of enrollment for 2017 under the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. But for some people who have health insurance, getting appropriate coverage can be a challenge. More than 43 million Americans suffer from depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues. But more than half never get help, even people who have health insurance. From PBS station KQED in San Francisco, reporter April Demboski and producer Shiraz Sadiq bring us a story of a single mother struggling to use her benefits to get treatment for herself and her son with autism.
A stigma around seeking help for mental health issues, and especially now, given that over the last 2 years, we have seen a spike in them. During the pandemic, about 4 in 10 adults in the US have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder. That's up from 1 in 10 who'd reported them a year before. It may help explain why, for that 1 month last year, everyone on the internet suddenly started singing sea shanties. It was clearly a collective cry for help. So encouraging people to talk to someone is a very good idea, but as people increasingly do seek help, they're discovering a system that is just not set up to provide it. There have long been wait lists to see a therapist, but it has gotten significantly worse since the pandemic, with 65% of psychologists reporting they had no capacity for new patients. In fact, more than half the people who need mental health care do not receive it, with that rate being even higher for minority populations. Emergency rooms are now becoming overloaded with people, and especially children, who have nowhere else to go, stuck in beds there because there is no space in proper facilities to treat them. Just take this couple, whose 14-year-old was in crisis and who followed their paediatrician's advice to go straight to the ER with him.
I remember we got out of the car and we hugged him and we said, we're going to do whatever it takes to help you, whatever it takes.
But once inside, staff told them there was no space across the state for mental health services, so they were admitted to the ED, where 15 other children were also waiting. Their son has spent 27 days at Children's waiting.
You come in for help and you're desperate for it, and you can't get it.
That kid was stuck waiting in the ER for 27 days. And set aside the fact that that is not the most calming place for someone experiencing a crisis, you can't just put off mental health care indefinitely. It's not a check engine light or a New Yorker article you're definitely going to finish. It's been sitting next to the toilet since the Obama administration. Accept defeat.
It's Alison, and this is the Girls Gone Menopause podcast. We're back from the break. We know those audio snippets we played at the top were kind of long, but what we want you to notice is that the PBS NewsHour audio snippet was from November 2016, and the John Oliver segment was from June 2022.
This is Adreana. Yeah, those two segments were produced 6 years apart, and not a lot has changed regarding how hard it is for kids, and adults for that matter, to access mental health care. And I think it's important to bust a myth here. A lot of people think, well, if I just had enough money, I could fix this.
Oh, absolutely not. Look at Rob Reiner.
Exactly. Rob Reiner and his wife are very wealthy. They have connections, resources, access to the best doctors money can buy, and they still struggled immensely to help their son through addiction and mental health battles.
If a Hollywood legend with so many resources can't easily solve this for his child, what hope does a middle-class family in the suburbs have? Or a single mom working 2 jobs?
It proves that parents cannot solve this problem on their own. We can love our kids, we can mortgage our houses, we can scream from the rooftops, but we are operating inside a broken infrastructure.
The entire healthcare system, including the mental health infrastructure, has to be revamped. We need a system that actually helps people, that creates a real social safety net, not just for the homeless, but for families drowning in crisis.
And that brings us to the hard truth. This won't change through individual effort. It will only be done if people make it a voting issue.
We have to vote on this. When you're looking at state legislature representatives or congressional representatives, you need to ask, what is your plan for mental health reform?
Political will is the missing piece. Holding lawmakers accountable to create a just and effective healthcare system is the only thing that will give parents the support they actually need to save their mentally ill kids.
Until then, we are all just like Chin Rodger or the parents in foster care offices, doing our best in a system set up to fail us.
It's heavy, we know, but if you have a child under 18 who is struggling, do not wait. Use the leverage you have now. And for the rest of us, let's get to the ballot box.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you're a parent with a child who has struggled with mental illness, we would love to hear from you in the comments.
And if you found this episode of Girls Gone Menopause illuminating, please like, subscribe, and share. We appreciate your support. Until next time, this is Adreana signing off from the Girls Gone Menopause podcast.
And this is Alison. Thanks so much for listening.